G'day YouTube, Smiling Snake here. I thought I'd demonstrate something I've been working on lately. I found a nearby beach which has iron sand in it, and it was suggested to me that showing you guys how I extract it would maybe prove interesting. First off, I collected some of the sand from the beach. Usually just if you find a black deposit in the sand, that's probably magnetite, which is the stuff we're looking for. Brought it home here, dried it out, and now I'm going to show you the refining process I use. Obviously I'm going to have to take it off to a friend of mine who has a forge and get it smelted down, but in the initial stages this is how I do it. This is iron sand. That's about a ½ kilo that I've collected so far. In this case it is naturally forming magnetite, which means that it's magnetic, which suggests a fairly easy way of collecting the stuff. For these ones I used a magnet running through the beach sand inside a plastic bag and then collecting what came out of it. It still has a bunch of silica and salt and stuff in it, so you have to get rid of that. As you can see, it's got black and white speckles in it. This is the raw iron sand plus regular beach sand. There's a few bits of twigs and stuff in there, some shells. So I'm going to show you the method that I use for collecting it. This is non-magnetic stainless steel, which makes it excellent for that sort of stuff because it's very smooth, it doesn't get stuck to anything, and the magnet doesn't stick to it. So I'll just get a given amount so that we can get an idea about what concentration of iron sand to regular sand we had. There we go, 200 grams even. So the next phase of this is to wash it, get rid of all the leftover clay, sand, gunk and salt from it, and then move on to the next phase. We have the sand in the dish. Now I'm just going to put a very slow dribble of water into it and then stir it around. The organic matter is going to float to the surface and get washed off, as will the clay, because this was weathered down from a clay cliff, so there's a fair bit of just regular soil and stuff left in it. Water in there is kind of cloudy and manky, so we need to get that out. There's also a good degree of salt in there as well, which is not going to do any good for the smelting part of things. This is very similar to panning for gold, I understand, although this is less about getting rid of the stuff that you don't want. And as you can see, it's a bit more clear. So, next phase is to get ready to collect what you want and get rid of what you don't, which we'll be doing outside. So, we've got the iron sand, well, the mix of iron sand and regular sand in the dish. We've got the dish to put it in. And we've got the tool at hand, which is 3 little neodymium magnets put end to end. I don't know if that makes them stronger or not, it certainly makes them easier to hold. Inside a plastic bag, because otherwise the iron sand will stick to the magnet and never ever let go. So put it like that, just bring that up here and you can see all the little black specks in there, and there we have our first bit of iron sand, which you then just drop into the receiving dish. Doesn't look particularly nice, just looks like this splat of black slime, but as you can see, looks like something out of Jim Henson's Creature Factory at sometimes, but yeah, there's your first bit. So you just keep sieving through. Now initially I was just putting the dry sand into a bowl and running the magnet over it in the air. That took ages and didn't really do as much good as this, so I prefer the water method now, plus it also cleans it. So yeah, just sieve and drop, sieve and drop, sieve and drop. Now there is a lot of other stuff mixed in there because iron sand is heavier than regular silica, so it will naturally drop to the bottom. Now the reason you don't just run the magnet through and collect everything that gets on it is there's actually 2 kinds of iron sand in this. There's the stuff that we're collecting here, which is the slightly larger particles and is more magnetic. And there seems to be a lower grade of stuff in there that it'll stick to the magnet, but it doesn't stick as strongly. It's also kind of finer and slightly different colour, so I'm thinking that's probably a lower grade. And maybe I'm making this harder on myself or whatever, making it whatever, but I only want the strongest stuff for my project. Now, I noticed when I was collecting this, just getting a bag full of sand and then checking it, I was getting maybe about 2% of the mass in iron sand. When I went in there with the magnets and just running it through the dry sand, collecting everything that came out, I put it up to about a quarter. And I'm not really sure what it is if I find a big old solid vein of the stuff and just collect all of that. I suspect it probably wouldn't be much more than that. Which, if you're following along at home, means if you want to get a kilo of iron sand, you're going to have to go through about 5 kilos of preliminary extracted, or about maybe 50 kilos of sand just fiddling through with the magnet. So, which, I mean, in human terms is not particularly good. In industrial terms, it's apparently a very rich load. So, who knew? Now, this is not the traditional method that the Japanese used. Of course, they would just use something a bit like the method for extracting gold that you see in places like Sovereign Hill, using water flow and a series of baffles and stuff, or just panning for it. Because, as I said, it's heavier than the silica, so if you mix it in and get it just right, the silica will wash off and leave the iron sand behind. I'm going to try and get a close-up of the collecting phase of things. Don't know if you can hear this, but there's a little whisking noise as the iron sand gets drawn up onto the magnet. Just put that in there so you can get an idea of the colour. I generally get down to when it's like less than 5 millimeters out from the end of the magnet. That's probably the limits of things. I could go through and eke it out a bit more, but well, the extra black sand in there as well is that lower grade stuff that I was talking about, because you can pick it up. You can pick it up, but it's not all that flash. That being said, we've collected a goodly amount of magnetite sand there. So I reckon another 5 or so sieves through and I'll move on to the drying part. Oh, now, fun fact, I tried making an electromagnet to do this with. It turns out that it just got really hot and didn't really attract much, so I advise using neodymium magnets in place of it, unless you got one of those giant ones that people from like Hackaday make. Although, quite frankly, I think if I went down to the beach with one of those, I'd collect more than just a few odd looks. Alright, so this is pretty much tapped out. You can just put that onto the garden or something like that. All of the salt's more or less been washed out of it, so you're not going to worry about poisoning your plants all that much. There's a fair bit of water in there, so you've got to strain that off before you move on to the drying. Now, fortunately, because this stuff is magnetic, you stick the magnet onto the bottom and it holds it in place, which is a nice little feature. So just drain the water off. Sorry, I realised I went off camera for that. Drain as much of the water off as you can there, give yourself a bit of a spout. Now, this looks dry, it isn't, so you tap it a few times. That makes all the grains settle, all the water comes out, and you can keep going. So you do this a few times. Alright, so now we've got reasonably drained iron sand. So all you need to do now is put that out in the sun, and fortunately, since it is summer down here in the south, there's no shortage of that. And let it dry out. Now, you don't have to worry about it blowing away, because this stuff is basically iron, so it'll stay where it's put, basically. So I'm going to take off this into the sun and then we'll see. So this should probably be dried out by an hour or two at a reasonable temperature. It's about 25-30 degrees here, so it shouldn't be too long. If it doesn't work out that way, if it's going too slow for you, just bung it in the oven just under 100 degrees and stir it around every now and then to let it get dried out. That being said, I prefer the sun just because it's cheap, it's free. You don't have to worry about stuffing up the oven, and you don't have to worry about someone else accidentally cooking it into something, as has happened with me a time or two. So we're going to see how much we got from that initial amount of sand, which was 200 grams. So I've got the scales tiered in, and let's see what we get. So about 65 grams, just over a quarter of the weight in iron sand, that's pretty good. So this is the end of the refining process, or at least so far. Now all I've got to do is add that to the collection that I've already got and take it around to my friend with the metal forging equipment, and then hopefully make something interesting out of it. Cool.